Hello there, and welcome to this Sleepbook's reading tonight. The quiet game in the field shattered, giving way to the cold, paralyzing clarity of a threat I could finally smell in the air. A dangerous, beautiful stranger has arrived, and in his eyes I see not curiosity, but the sharp, consuming focus of a hunter. Now speeding through the dark, rain-soaked night, every plan is falling apart, and the only choice left is to run. We must decide in these frantic minutes how to escape the obsession of a tracker who has found his new passion, and how to protect the one person left behind. Settle in, slow everything down, and let the soft rain in the background carry you deeper into the quiet. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing that. If you'd like to experience ad-free episodes in advance, you can join the Patreon where I upload videos in advance. The link is in the description. Now take a breath, get comfortable, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum, and let's drift together into tonight's story. They emerged from the forest edge, one by one, spaced out, covering the clearing. The first male to appear immediately fell back, allowing the other dark-haired man to take the lead, orienting himself in a way that clearly showed he commanded the group. The third presence was a woman. From my distance, all I could truly notice was the startling, chaotic shade of her red hair. They cautiously closed ranks before continuing toward Edward's family, displaying the natural respect that one troop of predators shows when encountering a larger, unknown group of their own kind. As they approached, I observed how different they were from the Cullens. Their walk was purely cat-like, constantly on the verge of shifting into a low crouch. They wore the ordinary frayed clothes of backpackers, jeans and casual weatherproof shirts, but they were barefoot. Both men had short hair, but the woman's brilliant orange hair was filled with leaves and debris from the woods. Their sharp eyes carefully assessed the polished, urbane stance of Carlyle, who had stepped guardedly forward, flanked by Emmett and Jasper to meet them. Without any obvious communication, the newcomers straightened into a more casual, upright posture. The man in front was easily the most beautiful, his skin olive-toned beneath the typical pallor, his hair a glossy black. He was medium build, of course, hard-muscled, but nowhere near Emmett's massive size. He gave an easy smile, flashing, gleaming white teeth. The woman felt wilder, her eyes restlessly flickering between the men facing her and the loose group around me, her chaotic hair quivering in the slight breeze. Her posture was distinctly feline. The second male hovered unobtrusively behind them. He was slighter than the leader, his light brown hair and regular features nondescript, yet his eyes, though perfectly still, seemed the most vigilant of all. Their eyes were also different from what I knew, a deep burgundy colour that felt disturbingly sinister. The dark-haired man, still smiling, stepped toward Carlyle. He said, in a relaxed voice with the slightest of French accents, that they thought they heard a game, and then introduced himself as Laurent, and the two vampires beside him as Victoria and James. Carlyle responded by introducing himself, and then pointing out his family in groups: Emmett and Jasper, Rosalie, Esme and Alice, and finally Edward and me, Bella. I felt a sharp shock when he openly said my human name. Laurent asked sociably if they had room for a few more players. Carlyle matched his friendly tone, saying they were just finishing up but would certainly be interested another time. He asked if they were planning to stay in the area for long. Laurent explained that they were headed north, but were curious to see who was in the neighbourhood, noting they hadn't run into any company in a long time. Carlyle confirmed that this region was usually empty except for his family and the occasional visitor like themselves. The tense atmosphere had slowly subsided into a casual conversation, which I suspected meant Jasper was using his particular gift to control the situation and the emotions in the clearing. Laurent casually inquired about Carlyle's hunting range. Carlyle ignored the assumption behind the question, saying they hunted the Olympic range here, and occasionally up and down the coast ranges. He mentioned they kept a permanent residence nearby, and there was another permanent settlement like theirs up near Denali. Laurent rocked back slightly on his heels, asking how they managed a permanent stay, and there was honest curiosity in his voice. Carlyle invited them to return to his home to talk comfortably, explaining it was a rather long story. James and Victoria exchanged a surprised look at the mention of the word home, but Laurent controlled his expression better. His smile was genial as he accepted, saying that sounded very interesting and welcome, noting they had been hunting all the way down from Ontario and hadn't had a chance to clean up in a while. His eyes moved over Carlyle's refined appearance with appreciation. Carlyle explained that he appreciated it if they would refrain from hunting in this immediate area, as they needed to stay inconspicuous. Laurent nodded, saying they certainly wouldn't encroach on his territory, and he laughed, noting they had just eaten outside of Seattle anyway. A shiver ran up my spine at his casual admission. Carlyle offered to show them the way if they wanted to run with them, and then casually added that Emmett and Alice could go with Edward and me to get the jeep. Three things seemed to happen simultaneously as Carlyle spoke. The light breeze ruffled my hair, Edward instantly stiffened, and the second male, James, suddenly whipped his head around, scrutinizing me with his nostrils flaring wide. A swift rigidity fell over everyone as James lurched one step forward into a crouch. Edward immediately bared his teeth, also crouching in defense, a feral snarl ripping from his throat. It was nothing like the playful sounds I'd heard before. It was the single most menacing thing I had ever heard, and chills ran from the crown of my head to the back of my heels. Laurent exclaimed in open surprise, asking what this was. Neither James nor Edward relaxed their aggressive poses. James feinted slightly to the side, and Edward shifted instantly in response. Carlyle directed a firm rebuff toward James, saying she was with them. Laurent seemed to catch my scent less powerfully than James, but awareness now dawned on his face. He asked, his expression incredulous, if Edward had brought a snack, taking an involuntary step forward. Edward snarled even more ferociously and harshly, his lip curling high above his glistening bared teeth. Laurent quickly stepped back again. Carlyle corrected him in a hard voice, saying she was with them. Laurent protested that she was human. The words were not aggressive, but merely astounded. Emmett was very much in evidence at Carlyle's side. His eyes locked on James. Carlyle confirmed that yes, I was human. James slowly straightened out of his crouch, but his eyes never left me, and his nostrils remained wide. Edward stayed tensed like a lion in front of me. Laurent spoke in a soothing tone, trying to diffuse the sudden hostility, saying it appeared they had a lot to learn about each other. Carlyle's voice remained cool, agreeing that indeed they did. Laurent then accepted the invitation, but his eyes flicked toward me and back to Carlyle, adding that, of course, they would not harm the human girl, and they would not hunt in their range. James glanced in disbelief and aggravation at Laurent and exchanged another brief look with Victoria, whose eyes still flickered edgily from face to face. Carlyle measured Laurent's open expression for a moment before saying they would show them the way. He called for Jasper, Rosalie and Esme, and they gathered together, converging to block me from view. Alice was instantly at my side, and Emmett fell back slowly, his eyes locked on James as he backed toward us. Edward's voice was low and bleak as he urged, "Let's go, Bella." I had been rooted in place this whole time, terrified into absolute immobility. Edward had to grip my elbow and pull sharply to break the fear-induced trance. Alice and Emmett were close behind us, shielding me. I stumbled alongside Edward, still stunned with pure fear. We moved at human speed to the forest edge, and Edward's impatience was almost tangible. Once we were into the trees, Edward slung me over his back without breaking his stride. I gripped as tightly as possible as he took off, the others close on his heels. I kept my head down, but my eyes, wide with fright, simply wouldn't close. They plunged through the now black forest like wraiths. The sense of exhilaration that usually possessed Edward as he ran was completely absent, replaced by a consuming fury that drove him even faster. Even with me on his back, the others trailed slightly behind. We reached the jeep in an impossibly short time, and Edward barely slowed as he flung me into the back seat. He ordered Emmett, who slid in beside me, to strap me in. Alice was already in the front seat, and Edward was starting the engine. It roared to life, and we swerved backward, spinning around to face the winding road. Edward was growling something too fast for me to understand, but it sounded distinctly like a string of profanities. The jolting trip was much worse this time, and the darkness only made it more frightening. Emmett and Alice both glared intensely out the side windows. We hit the main road, and though our speed increased, I could see much better where we were going. We were headed south, away from Forks. I asked where we were going. No one answered me, and no one even looked at me. I shouted, "Damn it, Edward, where are you taking me?" He didn't look back, keeping his eyes on the road, and said we had to get me away from here, far away right now. The speedometer read 105 miles an hour. I shouted for him to turn around and take me home, struggling frantically with the stupid harness, tearing at the straps. Edward grimly commanded Emmett, and Emmett instantly secured my hands in his steely grasp. I pleaded, "No, Edward, no, you can't do this." He told me he had to, Bella, and asked me to please be quiet now. I yelled that I wouldn't be quiet, saying he had to take me back because Charlie would call the FBI, and they would be all over his family. I screamed that Carlisle and Esme would have to leave and hide forever. Edward's voice was cold as he told me to calm down, saying they had been there before. I shouted that not over me. He wouldn't, saying he wasn't ruining everything over me, and I struggled violently, though completely futilely, against the harness. Alice spoke for the first time, telling Edward to pull over. He flashed her a hard look and then sped up even more. She told him to just talk this through. Edward roared in frustration. "You don't understand. I'd never heard his voice so loud. It was deafening in the confines of the Jeep." The speedometer neared 115. He yelled that James was a tracker, asking if Alice saw that. He screamed that James was a tracker. I felt Emmett stiffen next to me, and I wondered at his reaction to the word. It meant something more to the three of them than it did to me. I wanted to understand, but there was no opening for me to ask. Alice's tone was reasonable, but there was a ring of authority I'd never heard before, as she commanded Edward to pull over. The speedometer inched past 120. She simply said, "Do it, Edward." Edward pleaded with her to listen, saying he saw James's mind, and tracking was his passion, his obsession, and he wanted me, specifically. He stressed that James begins the hunt tonight. Alice said James didn't know where I lived. Edward interrupted her, asking how long she thought it would take him to cross my scent in town, saying James's plan was already set before Laurent finished his sentence. I gasped, knowing exactly where my scent would lead, screaming, "Charlie, you can't leave him there. You can't leave him." I thrashed against the harness again. Alice agreed that I was right. The car slowed slightly. Alice coaxed Edward to just look at our options for a minute. The car slowed again, more noticeably, and then suddenly we screeched to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. I flew against the harness and then slammed back into the seat. Edward hissed that there were no options. I yelled that I was not leaving Charlie. He ignored me completely. Emmett finally spoke, saying we had to take her back. Edward was absolute, saying no. Emmett was sure, saying James was no match for them, and he wouldn't be able to touch me. Edward insisted that James would wait. Emmett smiled, saying he could wait too. Edward explained that Emmett didn't see or understand, saying once James commits to a hunt, he is unshakable, and they would have to kill him. Emmett didn't seem upset by the idea, saying that was an option. Edward reminded him about the female Victoria who was with James, saying if it turned into a fight, Laurent would likely go with them too. Emmett noted there were enough of them. Alice quietly interjected that there was another option. Edward turned on her in fury, his voice a blistering snarl, saying, "There is no other option." Emmett and I both stared at him in shock, but Alice seemed entirely unsurprised. The silence lasted for a long minute, as Edward and Alice stared each other down. I broke the silence, asking if anyone wanted to hear my plan. Edward growled, "No." Alice glared at him, finally provoked by his behaviour. I pleaded with them to listen, saying they should take me back. He instantly interrupted me, saying, "No." I glared at him and continued, saying they should take me back, and I would tell my dad I wanted to go home to Phoenix. I explained I would pack my bags and we would wait until this tracker, James, was watching, and then we would run. I reasoned that James would follow us and leave Charlie alone, and Charlie wouldn't call the FBI on his family. I finished by saying then Edward could take me any damned place he wanted. They stared at me, stunned. Emmett's surprise was definitely an insult, as he said it wasn't a bad idea, really. Alice agreed that it might work, adding that they simply couldn't leave my father unprotected. And Edward knew that. Everyone looked at Edward. He said it was too dangerous, and he didn't want James within 100 miles of me. Emmett was supremely confident, saying James wasn't getting through them. Alice thought for a minute, saying she didn't see James attacking, but that he would try to wait for them to leave me alone. Edward countered that it wouldn't take long for James to realise that wasn't going to happen. I tried to sound firm as I demanded that he take me home. Edward pressed his fingers to his temples and squeezed his eyes shut. I said, "Please," in a much smaller voice. He didn't look up. When he spoke, his voice sounded worn and defeated. He told me I was leaving tonight, whether the tracker saw or not. He instructed me to tell Charlie I couldn't stand another minute in Forks or whatever story worked. He ordered me to pack the first things my hands touched, and then get in my truck, saying he didn't care what Charlie said to me. He warned me I had 15 minutes from the time I crossed the doorstep. The Jeep rumbled to life, and he spun us around, the tyres squealing. The needle on the speedometer started to race up the dial. I asked Emmett, looking pointedly at my hands, about the restraints. He said, "Oh, sorry," and let me loose. A few minutes passed in silence, other than the roar of the engine. Edward spoke again, laying out the plan. He said when we got to the house, if the tracker was not there, he would walk me to the door, and then I had my 15 minutes. He glared at me in the rearview mirror, saying Emmett was to take the outside of the house, and Alice was to get the truck. He said he would be inside as long as I was, and after I was out, Emmett and Alice could take the Jeep home and tell Carlisle. Emmett instantly broke in, saying, "No way," and that he was going with Edward. Edward sighed, saying he didn't know how long he would be gone. Emmett insisted that until they knew how far this was going to go, he was staying with Edward. Edward sighed again, then continued grimly that if the tracker was there, they would keep driving. Alice said confidently that they were going to make it there before him. Edward seemed to accept that, whatever his problem with Alice was, he didn't doubt her premonition now. She asked what they were going to do with the Jeep. His voice had a hard edge as he said she was driving it home. Alice said calmly, "No, I'm not." The unintelligible stream of profanities started again. I whispered that we couldn't all fit in my truck. Edward didn't appear to hear me. I said even more quietly that I thought he should let me go alone. He heard that, he said between clenched teeth. "Bella, please just do this my way, just this once." I protested that Charlie wasn't an imbecile, and if Edward wasn't in town tomorrow, Charlie was going to get suspicious. Edward dismissed that, saying it was irrelevant, and that they would make sure Charlie was safe, and that was all that mattered. I then asked, "What about this tracker, James?" saying he saw the way Edward acted tonight, and he was going to think Edward was with me wherever I went. Emmett looked at me, insultingly surprised again, and urged Edward to listen to her, saying he thought I was right. Alice agreed that yes, I was. Edward's voice was icy, as he said he couldn't do that. I continued, saying Emmett should stay too because James definitely got an eyeful of him. Emmett turned on me in surprise. Alice agreed, saying they would get a better crack at him if they stayed. Edward stared at Alice incredulously, asking if she thought he should let me go alone. Alice said, "Of course not," and said Jasper, and she would take me. Edward repeated. I can't do that. But this time there was a trace of defeat in his voice. The logic was working on him. I tried to be persuasive, suggesting he hang out here for a week. I saw his expression in the mirror and amended my suggestion to a few days. I explained that this would let Charlie see he hadn't kidnapped me and would lead James on a wild goose chase, ensuring he was completely off my trail. I said then he could come and meet me, taking a roundabout route, of course, and then Jasper and Alice could go home. I could see him beginning to consider it. He asked where they would meet me. I answered, Phoenix. He impatiently dismissed it, saying James would hear that's where I was going. I countered that he would make it look like that was a ruse, obviously, saying James would know that we would know that he was listening, and he would never believe I was actually going where I said I was going. Emmett chuckled that I was diabolical. Edward asked, and if that doesn't work? I informed him there were several million people in Phoenix. He reminded me it wasn't that hard to find a phone book. I told him I wouldn't go home. He inquired with a dangerous note in his voice. Oh, I said I was quite old enough to get my own place. Alice reminded him that she and Jasper would be with me. He asked her scathingly what she was going to do in Phoenix. She replied, stay indoors. Emmett said he kind of liked the plan, thinking about cornering James. No doubt. Edward told Emmett to shut up. Emmett reasoned that if they tried to take James down while I was still around, there was a much better chance that someone would get hurt, either me or Edward trying to protect me. He trailed off with a slow smile, saying if they got James alone, they would have a chance. I was right. The jeep was crawling slowly now as we drove into town. Despite my brave talk, I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I thought about Charlie, alone in the house, and tried to be courageous. Edward's voice was very soft as he spoke. My name, Alice and Emmett, looked out their windows. He told me that if I let anything happen to myself, anything at all, he was holding me personally responsible. He asked if I understood that. I gulped and said, yes. He turned to Alice, asking if Jasper could handle this. Alice told him to give Jasper some credit, saying he had been doing very, very well, all things considered. Edward then asked Alice if she could handle this. Graceful little Alice pulled back her lips in a horrific grimace and let loose with a guttural snarl that had me cowering against the seat in terror. Edward smiled at her, but then muttered that she should keep her opinions to herself.